Welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly McFarland, your MC for today's webinar. This webinar was organized by Swords to Plowshares and is designed for the grantees of the California Women Veteran Project and the Swords to Plowshares Re-Grant Program to gain a cultural understanding of the women veterans they plan to serve through the grant. Women are the fastest growing cohort in the veteran population, and over the next 20 years, women veterans are projected to double in ranks to an estimated 15%. Many women veterans are accessing care from providers in the community. Therefore, it is crucial for community behavioral health providers and advocates to have a cultural understanding of the unique issues and experiences of women veterans. Leading the first portion of today's webinar is Bradford Adams. Bradford is a Skadden Fellow at Swords to Plowshares in San Francisco, California. Swords to Plowshares is a veteran service organization that provides housing, social services, and legal aid to veterans in the Bay Area. Our legal services include advocating for statutory benefits from the Veterans Administration and upgrading unfavorable discharges. Bradford is an Army veteran and served a tour of duty in Afghanistan. He also spent several years as a humanitarian aid worker assisting people displaced by conflict. Bradford graduated from Harvard Law School in 2012. The second portion of today's webinar will be led by Star Lara, Women Veteran Program Manager for Swords to Plowshares and an Iraq veteran. Star will facilitate a discussion about our wellness grantees' recent conferences and retreats, as well as upcoming grantee events. Participants may type a question to Bradford, Star, Swords to Plowshares staff, or even another participant at any time. Simply type your questions in the question box on the right side of this webinar's display. At the end of each portion of today's presentation, we will review the questions and comments posted. During the Q&A sessions, and if you have microphone capability, you may also ask a question of Bradford or Star by raising your virtual hand. Simply click on the small hand icon next to your name in the list of attendees. Kevin Miller, one of the Swords to Plowshares organizers, will be online during the webinar to provide technical assistance during the presentation. Please note this webinar is being recorded. Without further delay, please welcome Bradford Adams.
Thanks, Kelly. This is Bradford on the microphone here, and I'm going to be talking us through a presentation on benefits for veterans. The purpose of this is to provide an overview of the benefits provided by the Veterans Administration to veterans. I hope that after this, everyone will have a familiarity with the types of benefits that are available and, in general, the criteria that have to be satisfied to get those benefits. The purpose of this is not to provide enough detail for anyone to advocate on behalf of veterans. It doesn't provide specific legal definitions of each of the eligibility criteria. If that is something that you're interested in, there is a really good resource available. The Practicing Law Institute, pli.edu, has a one-day-long training that provides all the details that will be covered in this brief overview. We helped produce that. It's available for free online, and it's a great resource. So if you have any further questions after this, want some more detail, then I invite you to look into that. During this presentation, as Kelly said, it is possible to ask questions, and I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll type them in, and Star or Kevin will interrupt me if it's a good time to raise that question, or we'll talk about it at the end. But either way, please don't hesitate to jump in. So here are the topics we're going to cover. First, what is the VA, the Veterans Administration? Second, what is a veteran? Third, what benefits are available to veterans? And then briefly, how you can help veterans access those benefits. So first, what is the VA? The VA is a federal agency that is tasked with providing support and services to former service members. On the left, you can see a plaque with a quote that the VA has adopted as their motto. It's a quote by Abraham Lincoln. The mission is to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. This quote, I think, shows how broad the VA's mandate is. They're interested not only in veterans but also widows and orphans. And the VA takes a pretty broad view of how the VA should care for veterans. However, it also shows it's also a little bit more narrow than it is in practice. In practice, VA does not just provide health care, provide other benefits we'll talk about. provides care not just for specific injuries from battle, but for anything that may happen during service under certain conditions. The VA is a huge part of our government. It's a separate entity from the Department of Defense. It has its own cabinet secretary. It is the second largest part of the government after the Department of Defense. There are three major activities that it does. First, it has a health service that provides integrated health care, and we'll talk about that more later. Second, there's a benefits service that provides cash benefits to veterans and to other beneficiaries. This includes cash benefits directly to veterans and their dependents. It also provides cash benefits through educational institutions or homeless shelters or other people that provide services to veterans, and we'll talk about those later. The third component of the VA is a cemeteries service. So here are some figures that show the scale of it. It's really it's a huge program and a huge benefit that the government provides to veterans. The VA is supposed to help our veterans, and part of that is the VA is supposed to find every way, every lawful way that it can provide any assistance to veterans. What that means is the VA is supposed to be advocating for veterans. It's not supposed to be necessary for veterans to have advocates on their behalf because the VA is supposed to do that. In practice, not all veterans have had this experience with the VA. There are some veterans who feel like they have to wrestle with the VA to get the benefits that they think that they are due. That's not the situation in every case, but I think it's important for people who work with veterans to know that some have had a very positive experience working with the VA, and some have not had a positive experience working with the VA. The VA is part of the federal government. There's other organizations that also provide support and assistance to veterans. And this isn't the topic of today's presentation, but I think it's important for people to know what some of those are, just so they know the landscape of organizations that might be working with veterans. I've shown here some of those organizations. At the top there are state-level organizations. So the state of California has a Department of Veterans Affairs, and they provide services directly to veterans. Those services and benefits are above and beyond what the VA provides. In particular, every county in the state, and every county in the country for that matter, has a county veterans service officer. It's a state employee, and that person's job is to help veterans access all benefits they are due, including benefits from the VA, from the federal Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as any other state or other benefits that are available. Second category of organizations that support veterans are service organizations, and you see a few of their logos here. Disabled American Veterans, American Legion, AMVET. Some of these names might be familiar. Some of them have been around for a long time. They are membership organizations, and people who join those organizations can access certain assistance or benefits, certain benefits or assistance getting benefits from other organizations, such as the VA. Finally, at the bottom there are advocacy organizations. These are organizations like on the left, the logo for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, or on the right, Vietnam Veterans of America. These are also veterans organizations. They don't provide direct services. They only provide, they do advocacy work on behalf of veterans. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of these. Sometimes veterans confuse them. Some of the service organizations in particular have offices located at a VA hospital or at other VA offices, and so sometimes veterans go, they think they're dealing with the VA, they're actually dealing with a veteran service organization, and that confusion doesn't usually cause a problem, but I think you should be aware that that may happen, that there are these resources. Veterans might be accessing them at a VA hospital even though they're not actually working for the VA. So next I'd like to talk briefly about who are veterans. We have here on the right, that's Tammy Duckworth. She's a congresswoman and a veteran. We have a World War II veteran. I also put up here a picture of a member of an organization called Iraq Veterans Against the War. And I put that up there on purpose because I think it's important in terms of veterans' cultural competency to know that people who have served sometimes leave that experience with different feelings about it. Not everyone has a positive feeling about their time in service. And for people who deal with veterans, I think it's important for us to be aware of that. Not everybody wants to be thanked for their service. Some do, but they have mixed feelings about it. There's no easy answer for how a service provider for veterans should anticipate that or deal with it, but I just think it's important that you be aware that people who have served may be coming out of that experience with lots of different feelings and lots of different impressions from that, and that's something that a service provider has to respond to and be aware of. So who is a veteran technically? Well, we have lots of different ways in common usage of referring to veterans. And here are some examples of different ways that people might define for themselves or in conversation what a veteran is. Everyone who signed up, if you just signed that first contract and you commit to spend a certain amount of time, for a lot of people, that is what makes you a veteran. Here at Swords to Plowshares, that's the definition that we use. If you signed up, then you took that first step, and for our purposes, you're a veteran. One of the reasons that we have this broad view of what a veteran is because we recognize that military service can create hardships or other problems that require long-term care even on the first day of service. If anyone has been through basic training, even that first day can be a traumatic experience. And we don't judge about the nature or the quality or the sufficiency of a service, of someone's military service, before we decide if someone needs aid. So we take a very broad view, and everyone who signed up is a veteran. But there's other definitions. Only people who served on active duty. Some people are in the reserves, the National Guard. A reservist is someone who is in the federal military. They work for the president, but they typically only serve for basic training and then weekend drills. We have the term weekend warrior. So these people serve active duty during training, but after that, unless they're called up to a specific conflict or a specific duty, they may never serve on active duty. They may only serve for weekends. And for some people, that doesn't satisfy. That's not sufficient to be considered a veteran. There's other people who say that you need to serve the full enlistment. That is to say, if you sign up for 4 years, you need to complete 4 years. If for whatever reason you don't do everything you signed up for, then that's not adequate. Moving down, some people think you have to have served honorably, that if you're discharged for any reason and the military says that your service was not honorable, that means you're not a veteran. This can be a problem because there are people who may have served well, served in combat, and for something that happened later, they're discharged dishonorably, and whether or not we consider that person to be a veteran is a difficult choice. Some people only use the term veteran for people that served in wartime. Some people only use the term veteran for people who have actually deployed to conflict. So you can serve during wartime but be stationed in Germany or in the United States and never actually be in a conflict zone. And finally, some people use the term veteran only to refer to those who have actually engaged in combat. So these are all public definitions, and I'm just acknowledging that people use the term veteran in different ways, and you can choose for yourself how to use that or think about that in your conversation, in your work. Swords to Plowshares, we take a very broad view, and anyone who ever signed up is a veteran as far as we are concerned. But we need to talk about what is the definition as far as the VA is concerned, because that determines what benefits the VA may provide to them, and that's the topic of this presentation. So let's talk about how the Department of Veterans Affairs defines a veteran. There's 3 prongs. There has to be federal service. That means that if you're a member of the National Guard, then you may not ever qualify as a veteran. A reservist is someone who is in the military but typically works part-time on weekends. They do work for the federal government. A reservist reports to the president as the commander-in-chief. The National Guard, also part of the military, also regulated by the federal government. However, some of the National Guard reports to the governor. The National Guard is typically a state resource, and most of the service of National Guard service members is only state service. It's not federal service. So, for example, if there is a wildfire in California, the governor may call up the National Guard to support a response to that wildfire. That's not federal service, that's state service, and that person may be on full-time active duty. However, that is not federal service, and so that does not qualify as that would not qualify a person as a veteran before the VA. Now, the same person, the same National Guard unit might be called up by the president and deployed overseas, and that has happened a lot in the past 10 years. In that case, it is federal service. The second prong is that the person must serve on active duty for reasons other than training. So every service member goes through basic training. Your basic training does not count as active duty for the purpose of making you a veteran. So this is, again, a case where a reservist or a National Guards member might be excluded. Reservist is a federal military service person if they only go to basic training, and then for the rest of their military career, they just do weekend drills. None of that counts as active duty other than training. The first part, basic training, was training. And subsequent events, if it's just serving on the weekend, that's not considered full-time duty. That's inactive duty. It's also for training, for that matter. So a reservist could spend 20 years in the service and never do active duty other than training. And that person would not be a veteran before the Department of Veterans Affairs. There's a third prong, and that is that the service must have been not dishonorable. Now, this one takes a little bit of discussion, but it's an important topic, and it's an important topic in the lives of veterans, and it's an important topic when it comes to their eligibility for benefits, so it's worth digging into a little bit. So when we talk about dishonorable, we're talking about the character of their service. I imagine most of us have heard of an honorable discharge, and this is what most people who serve in the military have received. It would be reasonable for people to think that the alternative to an honorable discharge is a dishonorable discharge. But it's not that simple, actually. There are not simply two kinds of discharge, two characters of discharge. It's not just honorable and dishonorable. There's actually 6 different characters of discharge that the military might provide to a service member when they leave the service. Honorable at the top, dishonorable at the bottom, but in between there are several intermediate levels of discharge. So there's honorable. One step below that is general under honorable conditions, and that part in parentheses is part of, that's all inclusive. It's general under honorable conditions. That's what it's called. It's a step below honorable, fully honorable. It has the word honorable in it, and it is considered to be a favorable discharge, but it is a step below honorable, and that does have some consequences we'll talk about later. There's also a third kind of discharge called uncharacterized. Now, that's what happens if someone has not served for long enough that the military is able to make a determination about the character of the service. Typically, if someone is still in basic training and for some reason they can't stay in, they're separated with an uncharacterized discharge. One step below that is a kind of discharge called other than honorable. And in the Vietnam War era, they had an equivalent discharge called undesirable. Those two are interchangeable. Other than honorable, undesirable. And below that, there's bad conduct, and then finally dishonorable. I need to talk in some more detail about other than honorable and bad conduct discharges. Other than honorable sounds like it's not honorable, but it's important to know that this is not a dishonorable discharge. Other than honorable is an administrative discharge. It's not a punitive discharge. There's never been a court-martial. There have never been formal charges made against someone for any misconduct. There's never been any proceeding where it can be determined if those charges of misconduct are in fact judicially correct or not, judicially accurate or not. Other than honorable is often used in cases where there has been small patterns or instances of misconduct. So it is a negative discharge, but it's not a punitive discharge. Let me give an example or a few examples of the kind of conduct that might end up with other than honorable or undesirable discharges. One is a pattern of misconduct, which can be as few as 2 documented instances of misconduct, and the misconduct can be very small. In fact, it can be things that we as civilians don't even consider to be misconduct. If you show up to formation 5 minutes late twice, that can be a pattern of misconduct, and you can be discharged with an other than honorable discharge for that. This can happen even if you had previously served honorably, effectively, faithfully, if you had been deployed to combat multiple times. It can happen even if your misconduct is a product of a medical condition. So we have dealt with veterans who served faithfully and effectively in combat, acquired some mental or physical disability as a result of that, and then in the process of managing that disability, they may be put on medications that influence their ability to sleep. They sleep in, they arrive a little bit groggy 5 minutes late to formation, and they get a misconduct citation for that. That happens twice, and they're kicked out with an other than honorable discharge. So I want to underscore that this kind of discharge, other than honorable or undesirable, does not necessarily describe severe misconduct or even things that we would consider to be in the civilian world misconduct at all. It does not mean that there has been any kind of formal judicial proceeding to determine the quality of service or the severity of the wrongdoing, and it certainly is not a dishonorable discharge. So I've dwelled on this for a little while, and I hope I've kept your attention to that. It'll be clear in a minute why that's important. The bad conduct discharge is a punitive discharge. It does result from a court-martial, and it can be a court-martial for what we would think of as a misdemeanor level offense, or it could be a court-martial result of a felony level offense. But it did not result in a dishonorable discharge. That's one step below. So we have these 6 categories of discharge, but on the last slide we saw that the VA is going to treat someone as a veteran only if the VA thinks that their service was not dishonorable. So it would be nice if the VA just took those top 5 discharges, the ones that are not explicitly dishonorable, and treated anyone who received those discharges as a veteran. It's not what happens. What happens in practice is that the VA takes the top 3 and treats them as honorable, or treats their service as having been honorable. It takes the bottom one, dishonorable, and it treats those people as having served dishonorably. And it takes the 2 in the middle, people who have other than honorable discharges, or during the Vietnam era called undesirable discharges, and veterans who were separated with a bad conduct discharge. And the VA itself gets to decide, by looking at the service record, if the VA thinks that on whole the veteran served honorably. So going back to our 3 criteria, the person has to have served in federal service, the person has to have done active duty for reasons other than training, and the service has to have been not dishonorable. So if someone served federal service, served active duty for reasons other than training, and received an other than honorable discharge, the VA may look at their record and decide that it was dishonorable in their eyes, and that person is not even a veteran. And there really have been a lot of cases. It's unjust and shameful, in my opinion, where there have been lots of cases where people have served faithfully and effectively in combat multiple times. As a result of their combat exposure, they have mental health or physical disabilities which impede their ability to serve effectively, and those events get written up as misconduct and they get kicked out with an OTH discharge, and for the VA, those people are not even veterans. There are things that can be done to correct that. One is you can go back to the service and request what's called a discharge upgrade. A discharge upgrade asks the military, whether it be the Army or Air Force or Navy, Marine Corps service, asks them to actually change the discharge, change it from an honorable to general or honorable, in order to rectify an injustice or an error. Another thing that can happen is that advocates can help the veteran to convince the VA that the service was honorable for the VA's purposes. So there are some things that can be done in response to that, but it's important to know that for a lot of people who I think we all would consider to have been effective veterans, they are not veterans by the strict definition of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and consequently they may not be eligible for benefits. I put a 4th item up here, a requirement that the person have served at least 2 years or the full-time order to active duty. This is not part of the definition of veteran. However, it is a condition for eligibility for all benefits, so it's an important thing to keep in mind. Excuse me. What this means is that someone who satisfied the first 3 elements but only served a year and a half, because after a year and a half they separated, maybe for a neutral reason, maybe not misconduct, maybe they separated, got an honorable discharge after a year and a half because they got pregnant or something else. If they didn't serve the 2 years, then the government has decided they haven't provided enough of a service to deserve VA benefits. They are a veteran, but they're not going to get any VA benefits. the person has to either serve 2 years or the full-time order to active duty. That second one is relevant for reservists and National Guards service members. So if you're a reservist, you were ordered to active duty for 1 year to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, you do the time you were ordered, you go home. In that case, it was less than 1 year, less than 2 years, but it was the full-time order to active duty. So that also satisfies the requirement. This is not an element of the definition of a veteran, but I think it's important to know that you may be dealing with some people who served, who are veterans, even by the VA definition, but they don't have access to benefits for that reason. There are some exceptions to that, and I'm not going to go into them, but I want you to be aware that it exists. This is I want to underscore again, this is the VA definition. There are other legal definitions. The state of California, for example, has its own definition for the purpose of administrating its benefits. For California, it can be federal service or state service. And the service can be for domestic activities such as a state emergency. So a National Guards member who was never mobilized to go on active duty for the federal government in response to a conflict, but was ordered by the governor to respond to a firefighter, to a wildfire, that person would not be a veteran before the Department of Veterans Affairs, but that person would be a veteran before the state of California for getting state benefits. So I don't want to make things too confusing, but I just want you to realize that there's a strict Veterans Affairs definition. We're not required to follow that definition in our treatment of people who served, in our conversation. In fact, there's even different legal definitions depending on what state you're in. For the rest of this presentation, we're going to stick with the VA definition because we're talking about VA benefits. So we've discussed basically, briefly, what are the eligibility criteria for being considered a veteran before the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm going to briefly show you where you get this information in order to determine what someone's status is. And the source of that is this document called the DD-214. Now, probably for most of you in your work, you won't ever have to look at it. You won't ever have to cite it. I imagine for most people who are dealing with veterans just in the course of regular social services, if someone says that they were in the Air Force in certain times, you can just take their word for it. But if you ever, for whatever reason, do need to confirm someone's service record. Yeah, Star?
Hi, we actually just received one question that I think is appropriate for the conversation now. Lenore just asked, can a veteran be part of the Swords to Plowshares programs even if they've been dishonorably discharged?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thank you for interrupting me. It's a good time to raise this question. So the answer is yes. The answer is that we try to support as necessary anybody who served. Now, some of our programs have restricted funding. A lot of our programs are funded by the VA, and the VA will not provide any assistance to anyone who is dishonorably discharged. In response to that, Swords to Plowshares works hard to acquire other sources of funding so that we can supplement the VA funding with monies that can be directed towards people who are not eligible for VA benefits. Is that a good answer to that question? Star, do you want to add anything to that?
Hi, Brad. No, I think that answers it well. And if Lenore has any additional questions pertaining to specific programs, then I'll field that question through the questions comment. So thank you, Brad.
Okay. So this is the form where the essential information as far as the government is concerned about someone's active duty service is recorded. It's called the DD-214, and you will hear veterans talking about this a lot. In fact, many veterans who rely on VA services will carry this around with them because they're often being asked for it to verify their service and their eligibility. So even though you might not have to encounter this in your work, I think it's useful just to be oriented to it and know what it's about. It's very important. For the government, this is the bottom line on what happened during service. A veteran recently called it, this is the golden wrapper in a Willy Wonka chocolate bar. This is your ticket to whatever you might be entitled to because of your service. I'm going to run through the kind of things that you might see up here. The name, this is the service they were in, that's listed up here. This person was in the Army. It has their rank, when they separated, their address, their last duty assignment. It has their job description while they were in service. It has their dates of entry and exit. It has how much active service, how much prior active service in case someone served several times, which happens frequently. It has foreign service, so the person was deployed overseas. It has a section with decorations, medals, other citations. Below that, there's a box with other remarks, and this typically includes other information, such as, in this case, we have deployment, ordered to active duty in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. It shows the statutory authority for having ordered that person to active duty. It has dates of service, here is service in Afghanistan, and the dates of that service. And then at the bottom, it has the character of service here, honorable, and it has the statutory authority for how they arrived at that. This is the government's, it's their bottom line about what happened. It's important to know that this is not always complete and not always accurate. I'm dealing with a recent veteran who was deployed both to Afghanistan and to Iraq, and neither of those deployments are mentioned on his DD-214. That's an error, and we're working to correct it. It shouldn't be that way. But if someone comes to you and they're telling you some aspects of their service, and that is not on their DD-214, which for whatever reason you have looked at, you shouldn't necessarily assume that the person is not telling the truth. It is very common for these forms, as important as they are, it's very common for these forms to be inaccurate. All right, so this section we've covered what are the elements of the definition of a veteran as far as the VA is concerned. We talked about an important issue that comes up for veterans, which is that if they get one of these middle category discharges, like an other than honorable discharge, how the VA deals with that. In that case, the VA decides for itself if that was honorable or not. That can determine if they are a veteran or not a veteran as far as the VA is concerned. And we looked at this from the DD-214 just to be familiar with the record that the government looks at in order to verify the nature and circumstances of service. Next, what benefits are available? We talked about in some detail the definition of a veteran, because for the VA to provide benefits to people who serve, that person has to be a veteran. So you have to jump through those hoops in order to get any benefits from the VA. So now let's talk about what those benefits are. There are 5 major categories of benefits, and we'll go through each one so you're familiar with what they provide and what the veteran has to have done in order to qualify for them. There's disability compensation, pension, healthcare, education, and housing. First, disability compensation. This is the government's most generous benefit that it provides to any citizen in terms of the amount of money that it provides. This is compensation to people who served for reduction in their earning or social capacity due to disabilities incurred during military service. The key word here is service-connected. What this means is there is a currently diagnosed disability, and that disability is somehow connected to their time in service. It's service-connected. So this can be for just about any condition. A common one is post-traumatic stress related to combat. It can also be post-traumatic stress related to personal assault, including sexual assault. It can be conditions that are not specifically due to anything that happened in service, but merely arose at that time. So, for example, schizophrenia. Schizophrenia typically arises in someone's 20s. So it's common, or I mean it happens, that someone is on active duty, and while they're on active duty, an innate tendency towards schizophrenia arises, and they are diagnosed with schizophrenia during service. That person will be service-connected for that schizophrenia and will be compensated for the rest of their life, just because it arose during that period. It's basically anything that happens between the time you sign up to the time you separate which did not exist beforehand. Anything will be service-connected, just about. There's some exceptions here, but I won't get into them. But it's important to realize that it's very expansive, and it doesn't have to have happened during duty hours. You can be golfing on the weekend, break your ankle, and if that causes a permanent disability, then you get compensated for that. The way it works is each condition will be evaluated if it causes a current disability, and if the VA determines that that disability arose during service or because of events in service, then the VA will declare that condition to be service-connected. It will evaluate the degree of disability caused by that condition on a scale of 1 to 100. So someone might have diabetes. That diabetes might be service-connected, for example, because the person was exposed to Agent Orange. The VA may then determine, okay, the current level of severity of that diabetes is 30%. And there's a big manual that tells the VA how to make that decision. At the same time, the veteran may have other disabilities that are also service-connected. Someone could be service-connected 30% for diabetes and 50% for PTSD. And the veteran will combine those to arrive at a global degree of disability. This person could have other disabilities that are not service-connected. So the person at the same time could have renal misfunction, which is not service-connected. So the VA is looking at individual disabilities to determine the service-connected. If they're just service-connected, looking at each one to determine their severity. And then once it has arrived at the global measure, the rating, it's called, the rating of the disability, then the VA provides monthly payments, tax-free, based on that amount. And it varies if someone is 10%, only 10% disabled because of some condition, and a common one is tinnitus. Tinnitus is typically rated 10%. If that's the only service-connected disability, then the VA provides $131 a month for that 10% rated condition. If the same person is rated 100% for any condition, the amount is $2,900 a month. Star?
Hi, Brad. This is Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Kelly.
And I'm interrupting you again. We seem to have another question that I think is applicable for this section.
Great.
Lenore asks, how far back would they go in with regards to compensation? Is it time of disability presented or when the VA determines the disability happens?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Lenore. So the VA starts paying you from the time that you ask for the benefit. So what typically happens is someone realizes that they have a certain disability. They write to the VA saying, hey, I have this disability. I think it might be service-connected. That starts a process which can take 6 months to much longer, 5 or more years if it's a complicated one. Once the VA finally decides that, yes, this condition is service-connected, then they will pay you sort of retroactively the benefits you should have earned back to the date you asked for it, and then they will keep paying you monthly payments after that. So we have clients that served in Vietnam and now have PTSD, and it's just taking them a long time to come to terms with that and ask for help. So they come in now. They ask today. We ask from the VA today, give them notice that we're going to seek compensation for PTSD from combat. It may take a year to get that. When that comes through, they write them one check with a retroactive payment back to today, back to the date they originally filed, and they pay them moving forward. They don't pay for the 40 years when the person may have had that condition but just didn't ask for compensation for it. They don't pay for that amount. There's a small but important exception for recent veterans, which is that if you claim a condition within a year of separation and it's originally granted, they pay you back to the date of separation. But except for that exception, then they start paying from the date that you asked for the compensation. And please, Lauren, if you have any follow-up questions, please let us know. So the amount of money that's given depends on how someone is rated, 0 to 100%. For an individual, it's up to about $2,900. It can be more than that if there's dependents, but we're talking in the range of about $3,000 a month. These are tax-free payments. There's no means test and there's no offset. So you can be holding down a job, and on top of whatever salary you earn, you're going to get the disability compensation. You don't have to be poor. There's no means test. They just give it to you. And there are cases of someone who are 100% disabled but they are also holding down a job, and they get to keep their full disability compensation as well as whatever earned income they have. The application time can be really long. It's at least 6 months, and it's typically, commonly 2 years, especially here in California. The VA offices here are swamped. But for complicated cases where the VA doesn't agree with the veteran, you go back and forth, it can take 5 to 10 years to get a final answer. So that it can be a real slog. So that's one benefit. Compensation. This is really important. It can be a lot of money. It can really change people's lives. It can also be hard because you have to prove that it's service connected, and the VA is going to want to see records that something happened in service. If it was a long time ago, they're going to see records that the condition has existed the whole time. So you sometimes veterans have to work for this, but it can be a big assistance for them. Next one is disability pension. Disability pension. This is payment to low-income veterans age 65 or older, or who are permanently and totally disabled for any reason. This is called non-service connected. It's called non-service connected because unlike the compensation benefit, where they only compensate you for the disabilities which arose during service, which are service connected, the pension will pay money if someone is disabled for any reason, even if the cause of disability did not arise during or because of service. So this is called non-service connected. The formal term is pension, but you often hear veterans just refer to it as non-service connected. There's some restrictions on this, though. It's a lot narrower than the compensation benefit, the service-connected compensation benefit. It's only for veterans who served during wartime. The veteran did not have to have actually served in conflict. They have to have served during a wartime. So it would be provided to someone who served during the Vietnam era and was deployed to Vietnam. It would also be provided to someone who served in the Vietnam era and served in Germany for a year, or in the United States for a year. It's war times defined by Congress, not defined by common sense. So Congress has decided the Vietnam War period lasted until 1975. Congress said that there was no wartime period in the 80s. The invasion of Grenada, for example, is not a wartime period. So someone who participated in that military action would not be eligible for disability pension because that was not a wartime period. Congress decided that with the first Persian Gulf War, we did start a wartime, and Congress has never ended that wartime. So we have been, as far as Congress is concerned, in a continuous wartime period from 1991 to the present. What this means in practice is that for most veterans, there's a gap in eligibility for pension. If you serve from about 1966 to 75, then you're covered by the Vietnam War period. If you serve from 91 to the present, you're covered by the Persian Gulf War period. But there's a lot of veterans who served in the 80s, and they would not be eligible for pension. These are also monthly payments like compensation. They're also tax-free like compensation. It's much smaller. It's up to, well, the basic one for an individual veteran is $1,035. There's some supplements that could be available to increase that to about $1,700. But these are means tested and they're offset by other income. So what it means is that if we're not looking at the increase, if we're just looking at the basic amount, $1,035 a month, if someone has no income, then the VA will provide $1,035 a month. If the person has earned income, Social Security retirement income, some other pension income of $500 a month, then the VA will supplement that to bring the total income up to $1,035 a month. So they'll get the earned income of $500 plus a check of about $550. And if they earn more than that, more than $1,035 a month, then they don't get anything. So it's broader because the disability does not have to be service connected, but it's also narrower. The person has to be totally disabled. The pension does not apply with degrees of disability like the compensation does. If you're 50% disabled from a non-service connected condition, you are not eligible for pension. You have to be permanently and totally disabled or over 65. The standard, by the way, for permanently and totally disabled is basically the same for Social Security disability insurance. If they're eligible for Social Security, they're probably going to be eligible for pension in terms of their nature of the disability. And a pension is a little bit more than most Social Security checks, so it's usually a good move for people to get pension if they're eligible for it. The application time for pension is much quicker. It's a much more straightforward process, usually about 3 months. So a little review of these two. These are the main cash benefits, compensation and pension. So compensation service-connected, pension does not have to be service-connected. Compensation is available to veterans who served no matter when they served, but pension requires they serve during wartime. You can read the rest. I won't read through them. Compensation is a much more generous benefit if someone is eligible, but for people who are find themselves low income or poor, pension can be a real lifesaver. All right, those are the two main cash benefits, and those are the only benefits where cash is provided directly to veterans. Here's a non-cash benefit, which is very important to a lot of veterans. For some, it is their principal benefit for military service. It's health care. The VA healthcare system, we looked at some numbers at the beginning. There's 153 hospitals, plus I think it was 1,400 other health sites where health care is provided. It's comprehensive integrated health care. If you're granted health care, you get everything. It's a basket coverage, except for dental. There's special eligibility requirements for dental care. But once you get health care, then you have primary through tertiary health care for life. Now, for health care, you must be eligible. You have to be a veteran, as we talked about before, but you also have to be enrolled. And what that means is health care is not available to everybody. It used to be that when you signed up for military service, the government told you that one of the benefits of your service is that you would be provided health care for life. That was just a term of the employment. Sometime in the 80s, the government decided they can't do that anymore, so they now limit the enrollment. So of the universe of people who are veterans, who have served, who are in principle eligible for health care, they must also fit into one of 8 enrollment categories, also called priority groups. These priority groups are defined on certain criteria based on the person's income, the nature of their disabilities, when they served, and the VA at any time says, okay, we're going to allow in people who are in the first 5 priority groups, or first 6 priority groups. And people who are only in the 7th or 8th priority group are not able to enroll right now. Once you're in for good. So it's not like that change will affect individual veterans year to year. But it does mean that someone might have served and might be a veteran, but still might not fit into one of those enrollment categories. For our purposes, it's important to know that low income is one of the priority groups which typically get someone eligibility for health care. So if we're dealing with low income veterans and they're not already receiving health care from the VA, we should strongly encourage them to go to the VA hospital and enroll for health care and hopefully obtain it. There's no premium. There might be co-payments for medications, although for the low-income priority group there are no co-payments. And this health care benefit satisfies the Affordable Care Act requirements. Last thing, there's exceptions to these eligibility rules. I said that with health care, it's all or nothing, but not everybody gets it. Once you get it, you're in. You get full integrated health care for the rest of your life. There are a couple exceptions to this. Health care for military sexual trauma is always available. It's only available for that specific, for mental health or physical health related to that condition. But it's available regardless of whether or not you're enrolled, regardless of also whether or not you are a veteran, whether or not you met all those eligibility requirements. And that's really important. So someone who may have separated with one of those discharges that are not considered honorable by the VA, someone who may have served for less than 2 years or less than the full-time order to active duty, if that person experienced military sexual trauma, they are able to go and get health care for that condition or for conditions related to that. Also, counseling for combat veterans is always available at what's called vet centers. A vet center is a facility of the VA healthcare system There are basically just counseling centers. They don't provide general health care. They don't distribute medications or anything. They're typically located in downtown urban areas, and it's a walk-in mental health clinic, and they really don't ask many questions at all about veterans' eligibility because they're there to catch people who may have fallen through but still need assistance. So I just want to highlight those two because we may encounter people, if they have experienced military sexual trauma or if they are combat veterans, they don't need to jump through any other hoops. They can go directly to receive care related to those experiences. Education benefit. In the first slide of the data, it showed that there are currently 900,000 students whose tuition is being paid by the VA right now under the GI Bill or the post 9/11 GI Bill. Little important thing to note here: this is available only to people whose discharges are fully honorable. So we had those 6 discharges, and I said that the top 3 are honorable, considered honorable for VA purposes. Those 2 in the middle, maybe, maybe not. But for the GI Bill, it's not enough that you have a discharge which is considered honorable by the VA. It has to be a fully honorable discharge. There's also a type of education benefit called vocational rehabilitation. This is targeted towards people who are not right out of service, and I think there's some age requirements, have to be in your 30s or 40s, and it provides vocational training for people that find themselves unemployed mid-career or at a certain point in their life, and that can be a nice way to get some training. Also, stipend during the time that you're receiving that training. All right, finally, the last category of benefit that I want to mention is different kinds of housing benefits that are either provided by the VA or subsidized by the VA. HUD-VASH, that refers to subsidized housing. It's basically Section 8 housing, but it's administered through the VA and it's targeted at veterans. The VA also funds emergency shelters or transitional shelters. Usually those are not operated by the VA. They're operated by other agencies, but the VA pays for it. There's some programs to prevent eviction and to assist with rehousing. So for veterans, families who have missed a rent check and they're at risk of getting eviction, there's some programs where the VA will cut them a check real quick just to make sure they don't get kicked out, or give them a first, last, and security deposit in order to get them in a new apartment. There's also subsidized home loans, and then finally, some states, including California, have veterans homes. These are basically retirement homes for veterans. That exists in California. It's a state administered benefit. It's not a federal benefit. I'm not aware of any VA federal managed retirement homes like that. Although they do pay in some cases for other agencies to run long-term housing programs under the category of emergency or transitional shelters. I want to highlight here that unfortunately most of these are geared towards male veterans. I don't think any of them are exclusively for male veterans. That would be really surprising. But there may be, like, for example, emergency shelters that are predominantly male and are not necessarily a very welcoming environment for female veterans. And that's a real shame. I know that Swords to Plowshares has been trying to do something about that, maybe try to set up a shelter that is only for women veterans. And I imagine other agencies are trying to do the same thing. I hope that there's some success on that soon, because it's a really unfortunate gap right now. All right, so we covered the categories of benefits. We had compensation, which is for service-connected conditions. We had pension, which can be any condition, but there's some strings attached to that, some limitations on that. There is the healthcare benefit, education benefits, and housing benefits. All of those, for almost all of those, you have to be a veteran. I highlighted a couple exceptions where some healthcare is available even if you are not a veteran in the VA's eyes. For everything else, you have to meet those veteran eligibility requirements, and then each one may have their own additional eligibility requirements depending on the purpose of that program. So finally, how can you help a veteran access these benefits? I haven't provided enough information so that you could actually do that. I wanted to make sure that we all are aware of the possibilities, aware of the general factors that come into play when determining if someone might be eligible. If someone comes to you and you ask them and you find out, yeah, this person might be eligible for that, what I'd like to do now is help you point them in the right direction of getting help to actually obtain benefits that they may be due. So briefly, here's a sequence, five steps you can take, basically in order of intensity. First is you can file a claim or check the status of a claim online, ebenefits.va.gov. You can apply for pension, you can apply for compensation, you can apply for health care, you can submit whatever statements or documents are required in order to show eligibility for any of those programs. And it's definitely the quickest way to get any reaction out of the VA. Second, if for some reason that's not adequate, you can go directly to the hospital and enroll there, especially if what you're looking for is health care. Every hospital has an enrollment office. Walk up, they're going to ask for DD-214, show them that, and they'll tell you whether you can enroll at the time or what your enrollment category is. And also they may direct you to other assistants if they think that you might need it. The third is to go to the County Veteran Service Officer. I mentioned them before. It's a state resource. These officers are not working for the VA, but they work very closely with the VA. And their job is to help whoever walks in know what their benefits are, navigate the system, file claims, move the process through. Every county has one. If you Google search your county's Veteran Service Officer, you'll find the address and name of that person or that team. Fourth is the veteran can work with a veteran service organization. I mentioned these before. They work very similar to the county veteran service officer. They're membership organizations, so usually people have to become a member of the organization in order to get their support. I don't think it's usually very hard, but they do have to do that, and some don't want to. But that's just a string attached. They usually provide more assistance than the Veteran Service Officer does. The Veteran Service Officer, that's one person, work for the county. Every person who walks in is supposed to be treated. What that means in practice is that many county Veteran Service Officers really just help file claims and check on status. And I don't say that to impugn the quality or intention of them. They just have a lot on their plates. And so they don't do a lot of advocacy or research in order to support a claim. Typically they're just not able to provide that level of support. In contrast, the veteran service organizations do often provide more intensive support if that's necessary. Cases where it might be necessary is if someone does have one of those middle discharges, like an other than honorable discharge. In that case, it's usually not enough just to send in your application. It's usually necessary to write a cover letter, try to explain what happened, explain the story, make a case for the veteran. Usually the county veteran service officer is not able to do that, but a representative of a veteran service organization might have the time to do that. I'm not vouching for any of their quality necessarily, but they're available. Fifth, and this is the most intensive support, is there are attorneys who specialize in assisting veterans, and a veteran who has a complicated case and maybe has eligibility for a lot of money on the line can work with an attorney to do that. I provided a hyperlink here, vetadvocates.org. This is not a specific attorney. I'm not endorsing that attorney. It's a bar association of attorneys who do this work. And if you go there, you'll find a roster of different attorneys. And if you want a veteran, can check them out and see one that they might want to work with. They can also just search Google for veterans attorneys. There's lots out there who might be able to help. I should say that they get paid for it, and the payment usually happens in the form of receiving some portion of whatever money is eventually provided. So that's basically the list of resources that are available. Again, I can't endorse any individual person. I also don't want to criticize anyone's work. I'm just laying out the different resources that may be available, so that you can direct a veteran to help if one arrives and they need it. So I have tried to provide an overview of VA benefits to make us all familiar with the language, the issues, the resources that are available in terms of benefits that can be granted, and also assistance that can be provided to get those benefits. I hope this has been helpful. We've had a couple questions along the way. If anyone has a question now, please speak up, and I'd be happy to discuss it.
Hi, Brad. This is Kelly again. We did have a couple of questions we wanted to make sure. One is a new one, and one is kind of a discussion item as well. But we thought you answered this one, but we wanted to be sure. Arnie asked, will service-connected payments be affected by gaining employment?
No. Service-connected payments are not affected by gaining employment. If you are disabled, rated disabled for a service-connected condition, the VA will write you that check, and the VA doesn't care how much other money you're getting. There's a small exception I should highlight, which is that there's one benefit, there's one form of compensation where they give you a 100% rating specifically because you're unemployable. If you have some rated conditions that may add up to 50 or 70%, the VA can supplement that, say, well, I see that those disabilities rate you at 50 or 70%, but I'm going to go ahead and increase you to 100% because I think you're unemployable. Now, in that case, if you have that specific form of compensation, then if the VA learns that you are working, that might change their opinion about whether or not you are unemployable. But except for that, your employment status doesn't matter. And if you get 100% rated just for a condition, not because you are specifically unemployable, but just because that condition, according to the regulations, merits 100% rating, you will get that money regardless of what your employment status is. That's and just to underscore, it's different for non-service connected pension. The question was about service-connected compensation, and for that, the employment income does not affect your eligibility for the benefit.
Thank you very much, Brad. We do have another question regarding the steps involved and who to contact for eviction prevention and rehousing. Is there an overview you can provide on that, or a direction you can send one of our attendees?
Yeah, well, the VA program, which is focused on that issue, eviction prevention rehousing, the VA program is called Supportive Services for Veterans and Families, SSVF. So what you need is, in your area, find the Veteran Service Organization or just the nonprofit which has been contracted by the VA to implement this program. And in the past year, it exists here in San Francisco. Source of Plowshares is doing it in San Francisco, so if you're in San Francisco, you should direct someone to us. It was already pretty widespread, but I know this year they have ramped it up even further. So I don't know exactly, but I think really, most, probably all urban areas are covered by this program. There's some organization in that area who is tasked with providing that service on behalf of the VA. So unfortunately, I don't have like a list in front of me. So for in your area, you'll need to ask Google. You can Google search SSVF grantee for your county or something to try and find it. If you are unable to do that, I think if you email us, Star, or me, my email is up there, then I'll be happy to help you research that. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for an organization with a certain VA grant called SSVF, Supportive Services for Veterans and Families.
Thank you, Brad. We did have a very good comment from Arnie. We kind of wanted to bring this in the mix for some discussion and some input. Some of the barriers that Arnie's come across with veterans is that some are receiving their service-connected check, and while they want to obtain employment, they are perhaps not as aggressive in doing so. Any comments or recommendations with regard to that?
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that you deal with some veterans who have service-connected disabilities. They're receiving that compensation check every month. And do I understand right that, Arnie, that you're suggesting that because they receive that compensation check, they are not aggressively looking for work? Is that the situation we're talking about? Actually, I don't know if I can ask any questions.
I think, Brad, that's the interpretation on that.
Yeah.
And this is Kelly, by the way.
I mean, I guess your question is if I think that this is a disincentive to employment, and I guess your implication is that maybe we should not encourage people to get compensation if that might be a disincentive for employment.
I think what the question is more regarding how to overcome that particular challenge if some of our service providers are facing with that. Are there any techniques or plans that might help encourage the gaining of employment a little more aggressively?
Yeah, and so that's a really good question, and I hate to bump it, but I think that I think maybe if this isn't out of line, that might be a good question to address in a different webinar, and I'll tell you why. My job as an attorney, my job is to help people get everything that they are due in cases where the VA is not being as forthcoming or quick as we think they should. There are other people here who are social workers, and they're more experienced dealing with the whole person and looking at how different circumstances interact with each other. And I bet there's people at Swords to Plowshares, probably also among people in the audience, who have much better suggestions about that than I do. And I don't want to punt the question, but I also don't want to give information that I'm not, that's not really authoritative or competent. I don't know, maybe if you have any suggestions based on your work, then maybe you could volunteer those.
That's a certainly acceptable answer. And Arnie, please feel free to contact STAR, and I believe her contact information is available to you via the invitations that were sent out and the registration that was sent out for this webinar. We do have a couple more questions, if you're open to it, Brad.
Yeah, for sure.
One from Anita. If there are veterans who do not qualify for services at the VA, is there a preferred VSO that can assist the veteran with discrepancies in their DD-214 or other issues with records?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of organizations that do. That's called discharge upgrade. That's what we call that. If you actually want to change your DD-214, Swords to Plowshares does that work. Unfortunately, we're only able to take clients in San Francisco. So if you know someone in San Francisco, you can refer them to us. And there's not a lot of others who do that. There are private attorneys who do that. So if someone is willing to work with an attorney, then you can look at that web link that I had in the last slide, or just Google search veterans attorneys, and you'll find some who do that. But there really aren't many. Someone can go to a veterans service organization and ask for that, but even that is not very likely to be helpful. Most of them don't do that work, and also many of them have eligibility requirements that are similar to the VA's eligibility requirements. So some of them don't work with people who don't have honorable discharges. So for people who want to actually change their DD-214 to correct the record, to request a change the discharge character, there aren't a lot of options, unfortunately. Now, at our website, Swords to Plowshares, we have some self-help guides, and some of those self-help guides are targeted to people who will need to represent themselves. And you can represent yourself. You can just request as a veteran yourself. You don't have to have assistance doing that. There are some self-help guides on our website. So you can go there, and I think it's on the home page, but if it's not, just search for self-help guide, and it'll pop up a web page with I think about like 18 different 3-page hand guides that we've produced, and some of those could be helpful for that. I do want to say that, and this is just a reminder, if someone finds themselves, a veteran has an other than honorable discharge, and that is preventing them from getting benefits, they have two options. One is, as a question addressed, to try to get a new DD-214, get a correction to the DD-214. And most organizations don't actually do that work, but someone can try to advocate for themselves on that. The second option is to go to the VA and try to get the VA to change their mind and consider the service as having been honorable. So in that case, your DD-214 does not change. You still have that other than honorable discharge, but if you're if you're effective, if successful, then the VA will look at your whole record and say, well, yeah, I see that you got that as an honorable discharge, but I think your service wasn't dishonorable. The misconduct was minor, your other service was faithful and meritorious. And if you are successful in doing that, then even though you keep that middle discharge, that OT other than honorable discharge, the VA will consider you as having served honorably, and you'll be eligible for all VA benefits. So people who find themselves in that situation usually want to try both. Both try to get a correction to their DD 214, an discharge upgrade, and try to get the VA to consider them as having served honorably.
Thank you, Brad. There are a couple more questions. Is there a difference in benefits, Elaine asks, for those that served in the Special Forces?
No. As far as the VA is concerned, they don't distinguish for benefits eligibility on the branch of service or the work specialty or anything like that. Now, the only way that might come into play is if someone is claiming a disability related to combat. In that case, then the veteran needs to prove that they were in combat. And if the person is part of what's called a combat arms branch, and Special Forces is one of those, then the VA is more likely to agree that they saw combat and that the events occurred in combat. That task is harder if someone has a job description which does not explicitly involve combat. Someone is an administrator, then the VA won't necessarily take their word for it that the events in combat occurred. Now, that doesn't actually mean it didn't happen. It always has been very, very common in combat that everyone gets called to duty. And there certainly have been lots of people trained as administrators who were sent out on combat patrols. So your designation of the type of your job description or the unit you're with does not determine your eligibility, but it can influence what you have to do in order to prove service connection for a certain disability. That's the only way that it should come up that someone served in Special Forces or in any other particular job description.
And in certain circumstances, Brad, is it the case where special awards or special benefits may be available for special awards like a Purple Heart or combat-related or extraordinary service-related awards?
There's not a special benefit for that, but again, it can be a factor in how the VA determines if a certain condition is service-connected. So if you're claiming that you have a disability from combat, so let's say you have an organ damage because you experienced a blast in combat. Well, in order to show service connection, you have to prove that you have that current organ dysfunction and that a blast occurred. Well, so how do you prove that a blast occurred? If you have a Purple Heart from that incident, well, there's your proof. So in that sense, documentation of combat events or specific combat events, as might happen with the Purple Heart, that can influence whether or not you get that compensation. It's not formally required. It's not a Purple Heart benefit. There are other ways that you could prove that blast occurred, such as statements from other people who were present. But certainly having that Purple Heart would satisfy the VA that the event occurred, and so that can be really influential. There's other ones. For example, if you're a prisoner of war, the VA will look at you differently in determining whether or not a current disability was related to your prisoner of war status. It is not a special prisoner of war benefit. It's just a factor that can be relevant in the process of determining if one of the existing benefits of compensation applies to you.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So we have a question from Lenore. So at the age of 65, the individual is disabled or has recently become disabled, they can still get pension even though they will also get Social Security. And I'm guessing and I'm thinking Lenore means that if they have filed for a VA claim and it's determined to be service-connected, that they can get the pension even though they will also get Social Security.
So here it matters if we're talking about pension non-service-connected pension, or if we're talking about service-connected compensation. I'm going to flip up to that comparison slide just so we can remind ourselves about that. So let's you use both the terms service-connected and pension, and so I want to clarify it. The pension is non-service-connected. If it's a service-connected disability, it's compensation, and the answer is different. So if you were asking about non-service-connected pension, so someone turns 65, they are already receiving, let's just say, $900 from Social Security. In order to be eligible for pension, they have to have served, during wartime. They are over 65, so they meet that. Their income has to be below $1,038, and if it is below that, then the VA will top it up. Will cover the difference between what they're receiving and $1,038. So if they're receiving Social Security for $900, then the VA will give a check of $1,038 a month to supplement that, so the total income is $1,038 a month. If, for whatever reason, their Social Security, because it includes retirement or something, is above $1,038 a month, if they're getting $1,500 in Social Security retirement, then they will not get anything from the VA pension because they're already above that threshold. So that's for non-service connected pension. For service connected compensation, it's different. Service connected compensation is not means tested, it's not limited, it's not offset by their income. So the same person turns 65, they are collecting Social Security, let's say it's $900 a month. If they are also service connected at, let's say, 50%, so I'm just looking at it now, 50% service connected gives you $800 a month, they will get both. They will keep getting their Social Security by whatever eligibility criteria apply there, and on top of that, they will get their compensation of $800 a month because compensation is not offset. That's true if their retirement Social Security income is $300 a month. It's true if they have pension income that's $2,000 a month. It's true if they have earned income. It's not affected at all by other income. That's for service-connected compensation. For non-service connected pension, it will be offset. They will never get more than $1,038 a month. I said before, there's some ways to increase that if there's specific circumstances, but basically, for their basic entitlement, it gets capped out at $1,038 a month.
Okay, thank you, Brad. We also have a request to speak a little bit about the resources for women who have experienced military sexual trauma and the issues that face them. Specifically, are there outreach, the methods involved in outreach to these female veterans? And I will preface this by saying we do have a presentation that we have done in the past and that we plan in the future to address this very issue. It is a broad scope and might be better served if we wanted to touch a little more in depth in another forum. But is there any brief information that we can give Amanda and the rest of our participants today so that they can have it in their toolbox?
Well, I can, first let me talk about the specific sort of benefits, responses that the VA has for that. And then second, you asked sort of, if I understood correctly, the quality of outreach. So not specifically what they provide, but how it gets provided. So first, what gets provided? First, you can receive compensation if you have a present disability as a result of that military sexual trauma. And one of those disabilities is post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and if the diagnosing doctor connects that to an event in service, and if you can demonstrate that the event in service actually happened, then you can get compensation, and it can be up to 100% rating for post-traumatic stress due to military sexual trauma. Second form of assistance that is available is health care. It can be, if they're enrolled for full health care, then of course they get health care for any condition. If they are not enrolled for whatever reason, then they can get health care for any any circumstances, any residuals of that sexual assault, including both medical care and mental health care. That's available at any VA hospital. And then the third benefit, which is related to that, is counseling at these special VA health facilities called vet centers. Unlike the hospitals, which are often a little bit outside of town, a little bit harder to get to, there are more people, a little bit less discreet. The vet centers are usually in a downtown area. They are designed exclusively to support combat veterans who have what's called re-entry problems. So it's basically mental health related to combat exposure and mental health related to sexual assault. So those typically are much better geared towards people in that situation. So those are three benefits. There's compensation, there's health care, and then there's a focused counseling service. The other part of the question was what kind of outreach happens, what is the quality of that, and I guess I'm a little bit reluctant to answer that question, first because I haven't experienced it, and second because it probably differs a lot depending on the facility, because now we're talking about the sort of the skills and the style of different people that work at different offices. I can say that with people who I have worked with, both male and female survivors of sexual assault in the military, there's a range of experience. There's a range of experience. Here in San Francisco, we have some doctors and counselors who are excellent, who people have reported are excellent, and so that's great. On the other hand, some people have gone to access mental health services related to sexual trauma at the hospital and felt that it wasn't a very welcoming environment maybe because there is a combination of men and women there, and for some women I've spoken with, that made them uncomfortable.
And Brad, I think that's a good transition point into clarifying the question. Amanda has clarified her question a little bit.
Okay.
And she's intending to do outreach and interested in how best to go about it, not in terms of what's already being done at certain facilities, only in terms of what she could probably learn from, as you just mentioned, not a very welcoming environment. Always referring to the military sexual trauma can be re-traumatizing and things of that nature. Are there any broad kind of abilities or skills or process that would help? And is that question better answered in our focus on our webinar next month? STARS indicated that we will focus on the sexual assault and resources as well as outreach during our presentation next month.
Well, I think that's a good question to ask to anybody, because we're talking about individual skills and techniques, and I bet everybody has different ideas. So I think if there is a webinar next month, then we should definitely talk about it then. I just have one thought to add, and not that this is comprehensive or anything. Well, okay, two suggestions. One is to build a network. So if you learn from a survivor that a certain counselor or doctor treated them well, that it was a good experience for them, then you might want to build a relationship with that person. So I know of a couple here in San Francisco. So when someone comes in and they haven't received mental health yet, then I refer them by name to those specific VA counselors or doctors who I know from other clients' reports have handled the situation well. So that's, develop a network. And the second is just a general relationship interviewing technique. But as much as possible, I always try to create a comfortable space for the person to report as much or as little of their experience as they want to. If I'm talking with a male and he sounds like he's referring sort of obliquely to something that might be sexual assault, then I tell that person that that we deal with all kinds of people, and that I have dealt with people who've experienced some bad things in service, including sexual assault, and those include both men and women, and we're here to help them. So some invitations like that are sometimes useful if it's taking a little while for someone to get comfortable with opening up. But that being said, I try not to ask many pointed questions because because I think it's best to encourage someone to tell what they want to on their own terms. Those are basic, relationship and interviewing skills, and I probably haven't said anything that people on this webinar don't already know, but that's what I have to answer that question, and I'm sure Star will have more.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'd like to ask Star Laren here to chime in with any wisdom and or information and guidance resources that she feels is appropriate. And perhaps Star is experiencing some technical difficulties. Do we have any other questions for Brad?
Oh, sorry.
Do we have any other questions for Brad? At this point, we had some great ones, and I want to make sure that everybody that asked questions felt they got the answer they were looking for and or sent in a resource direction that works for them. So with that, we'd like to...
Hi, Kelly?
Yes.
Hi, this is Star. The only thing that I would really like to add is just building on what Brad has already discussed. And when you create a relationship with one survivor or with one service provider that is providing very sensitive services to women veterans and or just veterans with these sensitive issues, that those veterans are the best word-of-mouth recipients you could possibly look for. And women veterans in general do a really fantastic job of networking with one another, and building that individual personal rapport creates a better opportunity for those to talk about their experiences and to really get down to what you are trying to talk about. So and just add to what Brad said, I think that is one of the key elements in making people feel more comfortable talking about their experiences, especially if they feel like it might be a re-traumatizing experience.
Great, Star. Thank you for that input. And again, we invite folks to participate in our webinar next month. We'll be focusing on this very topic. Well, if that covers it for Brad's question and answers, Brad, I really want to thank you very much for that informative presentation and really hop-in Q&A session. I think there was some great information that came out and shared, too, amongst the participants. Were sharing information as questions came up. So thanks you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for your attention. And if anyone has any questions later on, please, if you got my email, send it to me. If not, send an email to Star, and she'll forward it on to me. I'll be happy to answer or to call you back and talk it through.
Thanks again, Brad.
Okay.
For the next portion of our webinar today, Star Lara will facilitate a discussion and go over some information about our wellness grantees' recent conferences and retreats, as well as some of the upcoming grantee events that folks may be interested in. Star?
Hi, thank you so much, Kelly. Let me get my slide up here real quick. We're running a little low on time, which is great because we had a really powerful discussion with Brad, and he provided a lot of input and insight. So I just really quickly want to go over some events that are coming up and briefly touch base on some of the events that we recently hosted. So Farmer Veteran Coalition will be doing their conference in Davis the end of March. I'm looking forward to spending 2 days up with Tia Christopher, and then following that will be a retreat with Honoring the Path of the Warrior. And so the next event will be in June 23rd, and the Sahara Zen Center is a fantastic retreat center. So briefly, over this last week and a half, I had an opportunity to travel and get an opportunity to participate in some of the convenings that were held by 3 of our grantees. So I attended the California State University Stanislaus Conference, as well as California Veterans Assistance Foundation, their Women Veterans Stand-Up, and Reigns of Hope, Warriors in Power Retreat. And I had a fantastic time. I think that the organizations that have really taken this challenge to provide services focusing on women veterans are leading the way, and I think that we can only hope to see some very enlightening experiences when we begin to talk to the organizations after their events, and hopefully they'll be able to come in and talk to us about them at our regional convenings. So I hope that you all stay tuned, and if you do have any particular questions about any of these events, or you'd like more information about who to contact, who's the organizer, or if you'd like to find out more information about their websites, a lot of the information is not only available on their websites, but their social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as trying to find the information on news media clips and blog posts and additional information like that. And I think that we'll just go ahead and open it up quickly if there's any last-minute questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar.
Hi, Star. Thanks so much for that information. Again, Star can be reached at the information she's provided on the registration and invites to these webinars. And we, at this point, Star, don't have any other questions queued up. So if everybody's agreeable with that, that will conclude today's presentation and discussion. We want to thank our presenters, Bradford Adams, Star Lara, and to you, our participants. Please note that each of you will receive an email with a web link to evaluate this presentation, and your feedback is very important to us. Thank you again for your time. This concludes our webinar. You may now disconnect.